This meeting is being recorded.
And Lilli, just to ask your slide, you're going to run your slides from your end, is that right?
You'll just
indeed share your screen and so
yeah.
On. That's fine.
Just do shout if it's not looking like it should.
Sure, it's fine.
In which case I'll abort quickly and just talk.
I'm sure it'll be great. Okay, I think we are ready to start, and welcome everybody to this event. You're here today at the first of a series of Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport webinars about safety. I wanted to do something special as president, and it occurred to me that since our institute is so broad and covers so many areas, it would be really good to bring together the very best of our experts on safety from road, rail, aviation, and marine to talk to us about safety. Because each of our industries is really doing an excellent job, and they're doing a great job about improving safety. But I just wondered about how much of us knows anything about what's going on in those parallel industries about safety. So I'm really delighted to have Lilli Matson, who's the Chief Safety, Health and Environment Officer at Transport for London. Lilli and I used to work together many years ago, and I'm really thrilled that she's the first guest on my series of webinars about safety. So the whole lineup for today is that, of course, you're all very welcome. Lilli's going to give us a presentation, which I'm very much looking forward to. She and I will then have a chat. And after that, there'll be the opportunity for questions from the floor, which will come through the chat system. You won't have to say the question, I will say the question, and then Lilli will talk about it. So I hope you enjoy it. I think this is a great opportunity for the Institute to do what it does best, which is to bring best practice from across many sectors so that we can all learn from each other. So if I may, Lilli, I'm going to hand over to you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Leon. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. So I'll bring up my slides shortly, but just to say, first of all, I'm Lilli Matson, as Leon said. I'm the Chief Safety, Health and Environment Officer for Transport for London, which essentially means that I look after everything to do with our safety performance, our environmental performance, and the well-being of our staff. So let me bring up my slides. And the aim of them is to give you some oversight in terms of what we have been doing as an organization. And then hopefully, just let me get the right bit, that will help all of you think a little bit more about how you do safety in your area. So let me just go to that. So hopefully that all looks fine to you. Leon, I'm going to give you a permission in the background. If anything is not appearing or is not looking like it should do, just shout out, because otherwise I'll just keep talking. probably for about the next 10-15 minutes to give you this overview.
Thank you. Lilli, it looks very good from where I'm sitting. I hope it's the same for everybody else. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's get going. So Vision Zero in London. What does this mean? I'm going to spend most of my time, as Leon said, talking about road risk and road safety. But I will, and if you think about my remit, looking after safety across the whole of TfL, I will tell you a little bit more about how we're applying this discipline, this thinking to all aspects of our safety, as well as diving into quite a bit of detail in terms of how we have specifically, risk by risk, really tried to reduce road danger in London, and a little bit of a look ahead. So let's get going. So something about the policy context in London, and just the sort of magnitude of the city. Now, many of you will be very familiar with London, but for those of you perhaps not so, a city of near 9 million people, we're looking at 27 million journeys a day. While the public transport network does move a lot of people, the road network is where most journeys do take place, and it is where most people are either hurt or injured in a transport-related incident. We have a very clear policy strategy within London, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of providing really that robust backbone to the kinds of difficult decisions we've made around safety. We've set ourselves a clear goal that we want to move the way people travel away from private cars towards sustainable travel, with a sort of big goal that we would like to see 8 out of 10 journeys of all journeys, either by walking, cycling, or public transport. That's only going to happen if it's safe. And that's why underpinning this has been our Vision Zero plan. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. So Vision Zero for road safety. For those of you who are safety professionals, you'll recognize the sort of term of Vision Zero and the ambition that it represents. Essentially, a concept pioneered in Sweden over many years in terms of really not accepting the concept that people will continue to be hurt or injured day by day on our road network. And that system, the aim of Vision Zero is to sort of say that no accident is acceptable, and that we need to, rather than trading off certain amount of danger and human cost when we design schemes, we actually need to take a different view and design schemes in our road network in a way that accommodates the fact that people do make mistakes, kids do run out into the road, people do lose attention from time to time, and to create a system that is more forgiving to those mistakes and therefore reduces the risk. But in running and operating such a system, it is up to everybody, those who design it, those who use it, and those who experience that transport network, to collectively try to operate in a way that is safer. And that's why underpinning this goal, and for us, the goal is that by 2041, no one will be killed or seriously injured on London's roads. Underpinning this, we take this in a safe system approach. So to really look area by area, deep dive into where the risks exist, and to try to remove risk by looking at speeds, by the system itself, the streets, by the vehicles that operate on those streets, and the behaviors of those who are driving or using those road network. And then in a virtuous circle, look, when incidents do happen, what learning we can take from that, and how we can ensure that proper justice is in place and that we support the victims of that. So those 5 pillars underpin all that we do on road safety. But I said I would touch on how it applies to all of our work in TfL. And if you think about that, we not only operate the road network and the traffic signals and that influence the whole highway network, those including the local roads as well as the strategic roads, but we obviously operate the London Underground. We commission services on the London Overground, on the Elizabeth line, and run the bus network that runs across London. So we apply the same goal of how do you get to zero? how do you get to zero injury and that zero harm approach in all of our modes, be that the construction activity, which delivers new schemes like the Elizabeth line, or the commissioning of services, such as on our bus services or our contracted rail services, or indeed our river services. Because once you start taking an evidence-based approach to identifying where the greatest risk is and challenging yourself to think about how you can reduce it to zero, it is a conversation you can have in many different parts of the way we manage transport. And then finally, we tend to really try to apply this to the whole way we manage the organization. We want to keep everyone safe and secure, ensure that everyone returns home safe every day. So it's really something that underpins our strategic goals and priorities as an organization. And I think by doing that and by putting it really at the front and center of everything that we talk about as an organization, you start to move the safety culture. We're obviously a very large organization, directly employing 28,000 staff and with about another same again amount of contracted staff. We really need to work on our safety culture that underpins this journey. So how has this all added up? How has London actually performed since we started to introduce this approach? So if I look, just bring up the whole slide because it makes it easier. If I look at some of our near-term targets, so when we set the Vision Zero Action Plan, that was in 2018, and our initial goals were to 2022, and that was looking at progress over around a 15-year period. Our baseline was 2005, 2009. And over that period, London saw very significant reductions, which outperformed the national performance in terms of for example, and probably one I'm most proud of, a 63% reduction in the number of children fatally or seriously injured, more than a halving of people being killed on the network. And specifically, if you think about how responsible we are for running the bus network, again, really significant progress in reducing injuries on or by our bus. There is, though, if you look at that graph on the top right, still a strategic gap in terms of where we need to get to. If we set our longer term sights on zero, and we recognize that the pandemic led to a short and welcome downward trend in terms of casualties, we are still maintaining a downward trajectory, but it isn't fast enough actually to get to that zero. And there is a strategic gap, which means that we need to really focus on this and to drive deeper into how to reduce that risk. So let me tell you a little bit about what we are doing and what has worked. So remembering those pillars that underpin the Vision Zero approach, safe speeds, safe streets, etc. If we talk about safe speeds, the biggest tool that we've applied in London is to reduce the speed limits on the roads within the urban area, which are non-strategic, not the sort of high arterial corridors, but the more high streets and more local roads, to 20 mile an hour. Now, many boroughs had already made quite considerable progress with this, and you can see that in that map. The darker areas are where there are existing 20 mile an hour across London. We've extended that approach to our own strategic road network. So all of central London roads are 20 mile an hour. And more than 142 kilometres of our roads, both in the centre and more widely, are 20 mile an hour. And we have an ongoing commitment of London boroughs to extend that. And I'll come on to talking about what the impact of that has been, because particularly what we've seen is really significant reductions in casualties. So the delivery to date on our road network has reduced by around 25% the number of people being killed or seriously injured. And on those same roads, we've seen a really significant reduction, a 60% reduction in the number of pedestrians being killed. So these type of measures really work. If I look at safe streets, we have the data to allow us to be able to absolutely pinpoint where we're seeing accident hotspots and to target investments into those areas. Again, where we've invested in these safer junctions, providing designated cycling lanes, reducing the speeds, improving the layout, we've seen around 25% reduction in the number of collisions and people being injured. So that sort of talks about some of the measures under those two pillars. I think really excitingly is some of the work that we've done around our actual vehicles and really trying to target where we know risk resides. So when I first started taking on this agenda, and it was very much when Leon was working as MD within TfL, we did see a real growth in cycling, and very sadly we saw a number of really terrible cycling collisions that resulted in people being killed. Our evidence was able to work through and really identify what the causal factors were of that, and from that was born a very detailed evidence-based program on the improvements that were required to vision standards for heavy goods vehicles. We've had a progressive system of tightening the regulations around that and requiring consistently higher standards. That has led to a very significant reduction, a 75% reduction in collisions where lack of vision is cited as the key contributing factor. So we know this works. It's a long journey with operators. It's a massive amount of stakeholder engagement, but that kind of attention to detail really does drive risk down and save lives. The other area we've applied that same line of thinking is with our own bus fleet. We operate around 9,000 buses in London. Obviously, it's to different operators that run these services for us, but we specify the type of bus that they drive. And again, by looking very carefully at the evidence of how people were being injured on or by a bus, we've been able to devise and design a new bus safety standard. And an example of that might be, for example, we knew that people could suffer injury if they were hit by the wing mirrors of those buses. Now those new buses specify that there aren't wing mirrors. The driver looks at it, video recording, which directly shows a much better view of the outside world, better improved safety for the driver, no wing mirror to hit a pedestrian or person on the road network. So those are just some of the small features, but we are absolutely driving that forward. And again, if you think about that statistic that I said at the beginning of a more than 50% reduction in the number of people being killed on or by a bus, that reflects that kind of program. And the final one is that in our own fleet, we have our own vehicles, obviously, that are out and about in the road network. We've introduced intelligent speed assistance to ensure that people, whether knowingly or unknowingly, do not exceed the speed limit. And we've massively reduced speeding incidents in the TfL fleet as a result of that technology being introduced. And if I look at the fourth pillar, which is around safe behaviours, there's a number of different areas here. Just to briefly touch on them, enforcement is key. We can put the network in, we can put the right infrastructure in, but we need people to know that the rules of the road apply. And we've worked very, very closely with the Metropolitan Police to make sure that they really target their deployments and that they make more effective use of their enforcement. And we've seen a really sort of impressive uplift in terms of enforcement. This doesn't mean that there are necessarily more infractions taking place. I think those infractions were taking place, but going unenforced previously. Now we're actually seeing a much greater impact on people who choose to speed or to ignore the rules of the road that are there to keep people safe. But we also work to exert soft power, and that really is best exemplified by the work that we've been doing with the motorcycle industry, the delivery industry. We know that there's been a real explosion in people riding scooters, small motorbikes to deliver food, to deliver all sorts of things, actually, particularly post-pandemic. So we've worked with the key players in the delivery industry, Deliveroo, Getir, Just Eats, others, representing about 70%, I think, of all delivery companies, to get a voluntary charter which raises safety standards for that industry. And we will continue to engage and work with them to continue to raise the bar in terms of what we think good safety management looks like in the motorcycle delivery industry. We use marketing and outreach through our speed campaigns, and we've just launched 2 speeding campaigns to really raise awareness with Londoners how just even a little bit over the speed limit can lead to really tragic consequences. And finally, we engage with all school children around how to use the road network safely. And that's through our schools engagement program, which reaches out and reaches all year 6 students across London. The final and the 5th area is really one of the most important, and I think it sometimes gets overlooked in the Vision Zero discussion. But we know that incidents happen, and how we learn from those incidents and how we support victims is incredibly important. So we have put in place a support line called the Sarah Hope line. Sarah Hope is a remarkable lady who unfortunately was tragically, in a tragic incident where a bus collided with her and her family at a bus stop, and unfortunately her mother died and her daughter was very injured. She, out of that tragedy, has built this marvelous line which helps to provide post-collision support and help to people who are impacted by a transport incident. And we really are committed to that kind of support. And more recently, we've also been working with partners in terms of charity Break and Road Peace and the Metropolitan Police to have a wider network of support for victims of road collisions, where we make sure that these families and victims are provided with real immediate help afterwards, because too often we heard that people who were the victims of road collisions were left in the dark as to what was happening about their incident, what kind of support was available for them. Quick run through, not too many more slides, just 3 or 4 more slides, but I wanted to give you a bit of a look ahead in terms of what's happening next around these areas. So just returning to those pillars again, we will continue the work absolutely to progress reducing speed limits in the right roads across London. We have commitment of 220 kilometres over the next couple of years. And really to engage and work with London's boroughs, who manage 95% of London's road network. So their engagement is critical on this. We will continue to improve our own road network, whether that's through safer crossings, new cycleways, or more work to address those danger hotspots and junctions. And we know through that we can incrementally really tackle the worst locations on the network. In terms of safe vehicles, those programs I mentioned continue, further tightening of the direct vision standard, the rollout of our bus safety standard across all buses. That over time will really begin to deliver benefits as we have new measures coming into the bus network, for example, advanced emergency braking. And finally, around the safe behaviours, increasing that police capacity to enforce up to 1 million offences a year, more engagement with Londoners around the hearts and minds of why driving down road death is so important. And then critically looking at further innovation so that we are not missing or failing to turn over any stones where we can deliver safety improvements. The only other thing to note when I look at the post-collision response is one of the post-collision learnings we've done is to really look at the inequalities here and to see where are the most affected communities. And what we know is that the more deprived the community, the higher the risk of road injury. So we are using that new insight to work with London boroughs and to work with our own investment prioritisation to make sure we're driving down that danger. So last slide, in summary, Vision Zero is a really core goal, which for us has been hugely motivating, hugely challenging too, but hugely motivating in a way of bringing together a very cohesive approach to safety. It also helps unlock a real questioning and challenging approach where unless you're going and continuing to deliver improvements, you really haven't done enough. So it allows you or your engineers or anyone involved in this chain of delivery to think about what more they could do. And through that, I think we can demonstrate that we have really have reduced road danger in London, but clearly not enough. We may be leading the UK and many world cities in terms of year-on-year reductions in the number of people being injured. But we are not where Helsinki or Oslo or some of those cities where they actually genuinely have got to zero. So we will continue this. And at the heart of it really is the fact that you do need evidence. It's about the data. It's about building that business case, and ultimately about winning the hearts and minds for the change we need. Thank you very, very much. And I'm going to end my talk there and go back to Leon.
Lilli, thank you very much indeed. And do you know, the thing that comes to me through all of that, firstly, is the extraordinary progress that you've made since I last was associated with it a few years ago, you know, on the bus safety standard, on the work that's been done on the roads, the evidence-based and so on, which is just extraordinary. I'm hugely impressed, and I'm sure everybody's impressed as well. So just a reminder that if you've got questions for Lilli, we'd like to have them, please. There's a mechanism where you'll do that. That'll come through to us on the screen, and we'll talk about it. But I'm moved, Lilli, by what you've said, because there are people who are alive today who would not have been alive if those measures hadn't been taken over the last few years. And I think that's something for us all to reflect on, which is that you can never prove the counterfactual, of course, but actually the work that Lilli and the team at TfL have been doing has in fact meant that there are people alive today who otherwise wouldn't be so. And I think that's a sobering thought, and it also is a reminder of why all this is going through. So Lilli, one of the things you mentioned Helsinki and so on. There are other countries who are ahead of us on this, and they're getting some success. Is that right?
Yes. So, I mean, I think if you, look at, I first of all mentioned Sweden, where this sort of concept had been pioneered. And actually, when I think back to my early career, you know, people used to perhaps more jokingly refer to the Swedish obsession with safety and Volvos being really boring cars, but they were really safe. Hats off to them. Actually, they've been using all of their commitment, their political commitment, and their engineering skill for years and years to just diligently work through that safe system approach. And they have an incredibly safe network as a result. If you look at both Helsinki and Oslo, in recent years have had the marvelous experience of having a year in which no one in their city was killed. And that reflects, as I've said, it's a complex and cumulative set of actions that are taken, but it's really the dedication to looking at your urban planning, looking at how you're allowing vehicles in there, looking at how you treat people who choose to flout the rules and ignore it, and how you really bring over that political consensus, which I don't think we've ultimately got yet in the UK, around why this is so important.
Sure. And what's happened to people being seriously injured in those places? Have some of those deaths just been downgraded into serious injuries, or is there a reduction across the piece?
So there would be a general reduction across the piece, but that transition that you describe is very important. I mean, it is a choice between being alive or dead. But certainly, I mean, the product of improved engineering, be it on our own vehicle fleet or be it on private cars or to reduce speeds, does mean that often people, rather than being killed, may still be seriously injured. But ultimately, if you reduce risk, you will reduce the numbers overall.
Sure. And as is germane to this discussion across these series of webinars, the learnings from other industries. I mean, we're hoping through this series, as I said, with marine and aviation and rail, but have we got some learnings from other industries that we could share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what I see most evidently in my role, obviously, I'm responsible for the safety of the rail network as well as the safety of the road network. And we know that within the rail network, we have a much more highly regulated approach to safety, but it isn't one that would ever accept safety trade-offs to the degree that they are accepted on the road network. And obviously, the sort of governing principle is that you are driving down risk as low as reasonably practical. That's essentially what Vision Zero is. So although we use different terms in different industries, essentially Vision Zero is as low as reasonably practical. And then the onus is on you, or the accountability is on you, to try to really understand what that means in practice. Where does the risk come from? How are people being injured? Let's take that apart and see whether you can incrementally remove all elements of the risk. And I would say that the rail industry is much more prepared to systematize and look at the systems elements of safety. So I think I've definitely taken learnings from that to apply to the road network. But similarly, I would say perhaps going in the other direction, because the road network is an open network, if you like, and anyone can join it, and the risks are quite high, we've often relied very heavily on trying to influence behavior through clever marketing, through hearts and minds campaigns. There's some very, very good ones there. And perhaps when I'm looking at issues like escalator safety or passenger train interface, we could use some more clever marketing to really try to influence people and how they behave.
Oh, that is interesting, isn't it? For sure. So then, if we just transport ourselves to the conversations you might have with non-related people in the bar or in the restaurant or at the dinner party or wherever it is we meet our friends, Lilli, like me, you'll find some people around the table who will say something like, this is just the price we pay for mobility. That in order to have commerce, in order to have trade, in order to have travel, some people will get killed and some people will get injured. And that, sad though it is the price we pay for everything that we hold dear. The fact that we get our deliveries or we're able to get to work and so on. Now, I've always discounted that as a theory, because if we look across the range of people that we might talk about, whether they're train drivers or truck drivers or bus drivers or so on, the vast majority of those people never have any sort of accident at all in their entire lifetime. And therefore, it's not unreasonable to suggest that if most people can do it, then everybody can do it. So I truly am subscribed to the net zero concept. It is just about getting those other people over the line. But I am just going to ask the question, which is the sort of question I get from, as I say, friends and others, which is that, is it really possible to get to zero killed and zero injured on our network by 2041?
So clearly, I think if you look at cities like Oslo and Helsinki, you can say, yes, it is, because they've done it. But I would just, going back to your first point, actually, I mean, it is a heavy cost we pay if we accept it. The traditional sort of approach to transport planning is based on exactly that premise. It accepts that there are certain costs. It accepts that the cost of, or provides a quantitative cost for an injury and a death, and you weigh that up against the cost of investment. The issue, I think, is that this approach really undervalues the societal damage that road danger and road risk implies. It isn't just the direct costs, which are really substantial if you are, use the Treasury Green Book approach to quantifying them, or look more widely. And I remember being at a UN event where they were talking about this on a global scale. And for individuals under the age of 25 worldwide, the greatest source of death was no longer issues like malaria. It was road death. So that's how most younger people were being killed. And that's a massive economic loss to those countries. but then more generally, the other issue is that if you allow a network which is inherently unsafe, it will shape the way people use that network, and that use their city. So people won't let their children walk to school because they're scared they're going to be injured. That will drive levels of fitness and activity, which have longer term public health impacts for those individuals. So there is a whole chain of reasons why setting an audacious goal, even one that's very difficult to achieve, will unlock a type of thinking which says, let's look at the wider benefits here. Let's try to capture those wider benefits and make the wider case of why change is important. And then we know that actually incrementally, year by year, if you can deliver on that, exactly as you said at the beginning, there will be people walking around today who would have been injured otherwise.
Sure. Well, look, and that sort of neatly takes us on to the first question from the floor, which, as ever, and quite rightly, is an immensely practical question. And the question, in essence, says that in the areas of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, why don't we just fix it so that vehicles are not able to go faster than 20 miles an hour, so that compliance is mandatory?
Great question. So let's start with that. So I would say, and I was covering that a little bit when I touched on our own vehicles, that is a measure that we have done with our own bus fleet in London. So buses are having a program where they have what's called intelligent speed assistance added. It's also what we call mandatory, i.e. it forces that limit. It's not up to the driver to decide whether they override it or not. And that's very effective, actually, in ensuring not only that bus stays within the speed limit, but that anyone driving behind that bus also abides by the speed limit. And as we said, we've also done that with our own vehicle fleet, so the operational fleet that TfL uses. Now, there are absolutely proposals within the EU provisions for future vehicle regulations that was the proposal, that they would be mandatory on all vehicles from, I think, 2025. I think actually that won't be adopted in the UK, and I think it will even be watered down to a degree in the EU. That technology does exist. It's completely possible for that to exist now. There is an ongoing journey of public and political acceptability about whether that's introduced on a more wider scale.
Okay. You'll forgive me, I know, but I have heard it said that if you're on the night bus from Kingston to Richmond at 2 o'clock in the morning, where the bus is only allowed to do 20 miles an hour, that's a very low speed to be traveling in relatively rural roads with almost no traffic and certainly no pedestrians in the middle of the night. And isn't, they would say, the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit a bit brutal because it affects people when they're busy and when traffic is high, but also is applied in the middle of the night when it perhaps isn't serving a useful purpose?
Well, I would say that that's probably fairly limited. Many roads in outer London are not 20, they're 30. But in the middle of the night, we do also have people walking. We do also have people cycling. And the average speed of the bus in London is 9 miles an hour. So most of them wouldn't love, 20 miles an hour is a sort of a perfectly reasonable speed, considering that they're stopping at very regular intervals at stops. So yes, I can see that might be perceived to be a disadvantage, but any policy measure has its pros and cons, and I think the nighttime journey is one that is often cited as a reason not to do something, but I would say the daytime benefits outweigh it.
Well, and actually, that's the strong point, isn't it? If a very large number of people are protected during the day at the small disadvantage of a small number of people at night, it's still worth doing because the net benefit is so wide. No, that's good. And funnily enough, we're overlapping some conversations I've been having today, because I've been talking today to a manufacturer of electric vehicles, and indeed electric vehicles indeed for London, and we were talking about how the 20-mile-an-hour thing works. And the next question, which, as I say, overlaps into that, with the transition to electric vehicles, there's a difference in driving style between electric vehicles and vehicles with internal combustion engine. The direct question is, what driver training is TfL carrying out for drivers that need to drive both? And I'm going to widen that question, as you'd expect me to, which is there any evidence to suggest that internal combustion engine vehicles drivers and electric vehicle drivers are doing something different to each other?
So just to take up the training point first, because it's hugely important. So most of our buses, well, all of our buses now are diesel hybrid. So we don't have any entirely combustion engine vehicles now anyway. They are part electric and diesel, or fully electric or hydrogen. And the type of training they are involved with, I mean, apart from just how do you drive a bus, there is very advanced training in terms of driving with vulnerable road users in mind. So we have quite intense driving training, which involves virtual reality in terms of navigating the road and understanding how people walking, people cycling, people using motorbikes will also be using what is a very congested road space in London, and really trying to uplift the skills, awareness, hazard perception of our drivers. We are looking and will continue to track all incidents. We're not necessarily seeing anything that would suggest one vehicle type is more or less safe in terms of the driver behavior. But that is something that we would need to continue to look at and make sure that we reacted to.
I'm just going to develop the question a bit selfishly, because I have an electric car, as you know. And my driving is more passive than it is with an electric, with an internal combustion engine car. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the noise. Maybe it's the fact I'm trying to save the battery to get a longer range. I don't know what it is, but I know that I am a more passive driver with my electric vehicle than I was before. I think you just said, but maybe you just reiterate that there's no evidence that that's the case generally.
So I think it's maybe it's you don't have that throaty roar of your vehicle leaping into life underneath you. No, I mean, obviously it's been a transition. So the vehicles now, if we're talking about that acceleration moment in particular, the vehicles now, because they're hybrid, are pulling away in an electric mode anyway. I think, you know, there is also the ability with an electric vehicle though to accelerate quite quickly. So it's slightly conflicted. I think you're right that some people do find these quite a relaxing and more relaxing way of driving. And certainly you'll remember, Leon, when we first introduced the zero emission cab in London, and speaking with the black cab drivers, actually they found it a much less tiring experience driving the cab all day because it's less noisy for a start. So I think that is likely to have safety dividends. I'm not saying that they're not proven, I just haven't identified them in sort of
Sure.
in the fully quantified, evidenced way I like to do most things.
I know, yes. I know you do. Look, I'm going to move us on to the next question. And this is a very stark question. What causes on-board injuries to bus passengers, and how can they be reduced?
Yeah, so the type of injuries, just to bring it to life for people, are perhaps people falling down the stairs while the bus is moving, tripping, getting on and off the bus, or not holding on and the bus makes a maneuver which isn't passive, it's perhaps violent. And that can be for many reasons. It can be because the driver isn't driving at the best of their game, despite training, or it can be, and this is often the case, that they are reacting to something outside the bus. So another vehicle moving erratically, or a pedestrian stepping out, they slam on the brakes for all the right reasons. People can then can then either fall off a seat or hit themselves on a barrier within the bus. So what we try to do about that, so within that bus safety design, is that we've actually really looked at the materials within the bus, whether the floor is at all slippy. We've put down more slip resistant flooring. We've removed any unnecessary rails or bars that could cause people to bash themselves on them. All elements of the design have been taken on board to try to reduce things that people could hit. But the other way you need to do it is that driver training and making them really understand about the speed of moving off, the speed of braking. Their maneuvers will greatly influence the safety of people on the bus.
Sure. And as a subset of that question, which is my question, not the original question, is there is a little bit about people taking care of themselves. We are in a slightly victim culture, and if you're coming down the stairs of a bus, you really ought to be holding on with two hands, and you really not to have a phone in one hand and your bag in the other. There is a bit of taking care of yourself as well in this.
Yeah, so I hopefully I brought that out when I was talking about the sort of safe behaviours and the element of collective responsibility. Is that as users of the network, and I'm a cyclist in London, there is an onus on all of us as well to try to behave safely, to follow the rules of road, follow that advice about when you're on the bus holding onto the handrail. We do and have tried different methods of public education in terms of bus users, for example, about encouraging them to hold on. Quite interesting reactions. Sometimes people complained about too many announcements about telling people to hold on. But essentially, there is that balance of making people aware of the risk, but ultimately individuals themselves do play a massive role here.
We have enough questions to last all night, but you're going to love this one. This is a really simple, straightforward question to the heart. How much of a problem are electric scooters, legal or otherwise?
Well, there are no legal ones. The only legal ones are the ones that are part of the trial, the legal trial. How much are so I think when they first started appearing on the network about 3 or 4 years ago, we were terrified that they would be just a tidal wave of injuries related to them. I think the fact that we've maintained, this is private e-scooters, the fact that we've maintained a very strong line within London, and there's been quite a lot of enforcement by the police, that these private scooters are not legal on the network and you will have your scooter taken away, that we haven't quite seen the explosion of numbers on the network as we might have thought. There were, unfortunately, a few deaths, limited, is about 2 or 3 within the London area related to the use of private e-scooters. A number of injuries, though. We have worked really, really hard through the legal scooter hire program, working with the operators to put in place all the measures that we could learn from the incidents to take place that would make them safer. So they're bigger, chunkier scooters. They are speed limited. You have to have, they are, when you first use one the first time, they're really speed limited. They're quite boring. You go about 6 miles an hour. You have to pass a little test to go on them. And actually the safety stats from that trial have been really, really encouraging. We have not seen the level of injuries that I think people expected. Nevertheless, they benefit from all the safety measures we put in that would benefit cyclists. So segregated lanes, slower speeds, those kind of measures will also benefit the users of the higher scooters.
Now, I know I can't see who the questioner is, but I can feel the questioner would like to press a little bit harder on this one, because I think we're all victims of these very highly maneuverable vehicles being in and out of our vision with very little notice. So even if they're part of the legal cadre of electric scooters on the trial, I think all of us would recognize that they're just in and out. And although we're being very, very vigilant, they are being used in such an agile way that it's impossible for the rest of us, whether we are pedestrians or cyclists or motorists, it's impossible for us to keep track of all of them around us. And there's got to be a message there, hasn't there, about they also being respectful of the other vehicles on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to your previous point about, and it's one of the areas that we've really sought to try to cultivate more debate on in London is the culture of mutual respect on the road, and the fact that everybody does have that responsibility. So yeah, the road doesn't belong to one mode, and I guess one of the risks with scooters is if people who have very, very little experience of navigating on the road jump on them and use them. The question though was, have we, is that translated into the kind of sort of safety statistics at the worst that we might have worried about? No, it hasn't. Is it changed the way that we use the road network? Yes, it has, and it will continue to have an ongoing impact.
No. Well, I am just going to say soapbox moment, which I'm allowed to do as chair of the meeting. I think what happens is, and this applies to other vehicles, not just electric scooters, but that if I'm using my mirrors on a motorized vehicle of any sort, when I look in my mirrors, I am actually updating a picture that I had a few seconds ago, because I'm looking in the mirror every few seconds. And the trouble, it could be said, with cyclists, e-scooters, and the rest, is that unlike other motor vehicles, when I look in my mirror and update the picture I took a few seconds ago, some of these more agile vehicles could have been in and out of my area without me seeing them, because there's still behind me a blue van and a red bus and a yellow car. But actually, there's some cyclists and e-scooters and everybody else all around me, which I haven't had a chance to see because they are moving about. And so, to your point, the riders of these agile vehicles need to remember that they haven't been in my field of view long enough necessarily for me to have seen them. And that doesn't mean I don't have a responsibility to be vigilant, but they too also have to make sure that they're visible to me. So does that make sense in your research?
Well, no, I think it's back to the same point about sort of personal responsibility. I think that's right, but I think it also undermines or sort of underpins the importance of, I actually really don't want a road network with lots of people diving in and out. So the approach we would take is on busy roads where you have a heavy mixing of vehicles. We're trying to provide more opportunities for people to be segregated, whether that's in bus lanes where cyclists and scooter riders can go and be outside the general traffic, or in actually designated cycle lanes, or through signing onto back streets where there's lower traffic levels. So an ideal traffic mix where everybody's dodging each other is not the way I would like to plan London's transport. And indeed, that's not what our transport strategy says. So although that does happen, the goal, the sort of Vision Zero goal, is to create a network which reduces the risk by making it less reliant on personal decisions in the moment.
Sure. So I'm going to come to our last question from the audience, and I've got a stream of questions, Lilli, which shows how exciting people find this and how much people are interested to find out more. So I'm thoroughly convinced about this. But on our last question, and just to give it enough time for you to answer it properly, and the question I'm reading says, can you expand on what is being done to improve safety for women across London's transport network? And do you have any data on whether transport is getting safer for women in London or not?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of road safety, just in terms of stats, just so you understand, because most 80% of people who are killed or seriously injured on London's roads are either walking, cycling, or using a motorcycle. Because cycling and motorcycling is particularly tipped slightly to the male gender, particularly totally with the motorcycling, less so with the cycling. There are more casualties that are impacting on men on the road network. However, and a lot of what we're trying to do in terms of, if I look at reducing road risk and improving safety, is to provide the kind of safe network, the kind of designated lanes, alternative routes that I just was talking about, which we know are a barrier to women even trying those kind of modes in the first place. So they will not cycle, or they will not choose to do certain journeys if they don't feel safe. So we are seeing an uptick now in women cycling and taking that kind of mode. And that those are safer journeys because they are using the kind of safer infrastructure that we put in. On the wider public transport network, which is comparatively, when we look at other public transport networks, an incredibly safe network. But don't get me wrong, the issue of harassment, sexual harassment, fear and intimidation that many, many women feel is incredibly real. So we have a program very much centered on women's security, on ending violence against women and girls, which includes a range of measures from the training of our staff to CCTV on the public transport network, to help points, to active campaigns to encourage what we call active bystanders, to people are ready to call out inappropriate behavior. We work very closely with others in the rail network to say that this kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and partner with organizations like the British Transport Police, who, thank goodness, have put this very high on their agenda too as a real priority. So we want people to report incidents. We want people to report if things are happening or aren't right, and we are confident that the BTP will be taking this very seriously.
BTP, of course, is confined to the rail network.
So yes, and so
are we happy that the Metropolitan Police is equally?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Indeed so. Well, look, that's very interesting, and look, I can't believe it. We've done nearly an hour on this. We've got a long list of questions and so on, but we have to finish somewhere, so we're going to finish now. So Lilli, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your presentation, and also being so very forthright in the answers to some, I thought, some very candid questions, or really very good questions that really got to the heart of the matter, which is amazing. So we are, I'm afraid, having to call a halt, but nevertheless, I think we've opened up a whole series of good conversations about safety in this area. As we said earlier, some people are alive and uninjured who would otherwise not be with us, and that is a great testament to the work that Lilli and the team at TfL has done as far as London is concerned. And if I may say so, against some political pressure, because not all of the measures which are being taken to improve safety are necessarily democratically supported across the population of voters. So I think this also tells a story about strong political leadership, and sometimes being prepared to take some quite difficult decisions in the face of popular opinion. And I know that the mayors of the combined authorities, which of course London is the pioneer, but there are others in Manchester, Birmingham and so on, are grappling with the same situation about needing to take bold action in order to promote safety and improve things, which may not be universally popular against everybody for reasons that we might all understand. So I'm thoroughly impressed by everything that's going on. Lilli, thank you again very much indeed for joining this debate, which, as I say, we will also talk about airline and marine and rail safety. And it's my deepest wish that members of the Chartered Institute learn a few things about what's going on in other parallel areas, which may further improve safety in the areas in which they're working. So thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid there's no way to give you a proper round of applause, Lilli, virtually, but I know that people are cheering from the sides, even virtually, to thank you so much for a lovely presentation, answering those questions in such a forthright manner. And I hope we all feel a little bit better educated and informed than we were at the start. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. This webinar will be available for download and recording later. And I hope we have lots of downloads and people and so on learning from it. Thanks very much.